morning Mr. Amitabh Kant, who's the Sherpa of India's G20 presidency. Mr. Amitabh Kant needs no introduction, but let me try and give you two tidbits about him that are relevant to this particular day that we meet in. First, I must confess that as I was speaking to him, their communique and their recommendations are at a far more advanced stage than the T20 communique and T20 recommendations. In fact, I was this morning very pleased to tell him that in the next few days you will have the draft from us. He actually showed me his work, and that's far more extensive, far more advanced. So I really hope that we use this opportunity of the next 2 days to finalize the task force recommendations so that we in the next few days can hand over the Sherpa our action points for their consideration and to be included. So he is on top of the game. He is ready with producing something that is significant for the times we live in. He's acutely aware of the challenges around development, around climate, around gender, around global governance, because he has been doing that for his whole life. As first career bureaucrat in the government, then head of India's national think tank, the Niti Aayog, and now as the Sherpa, he is absolutely determined to make significant contributions at this time, this most crucial moment in our global history, this moment when we need to put together some innovative and creative solutions. So that's the first part I want to tell you about Mr. Amitabh Kant. He expects a lot from us, and we have to deliver. The second, he's also a new author. He's just released his book, and he is in between his book tour. So while doing all of this, he has also written a significant book on India, on the transformations in India, on making India, and hopefully along the way, sometimes at a T20 event, we will have you speak about your book next time, sir. At our final event, as we close it, we would like you to present your book to all of us and discuss that as well. But as usual, it's a privilege and honor to have you with us this morning. And without further ado, let me invite you to speak to us. Mr. Amitabh Kant.
Thank you, Samir, Mr. Chenoy, Mr. Jaitley, Mr. Sachin Chaturvedi, the many distinguished guests who have assembled here today from different parts of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly delighted to be here at this T20 event where all the intellectuals and leading thinkers of the world have assembled. We're meeting at a point of time when there are several challenges confronting the world. The post-COVID era has seen a vast number of people go below the poverty line. Almost 200 million people have lost their jobs, almost 200 million people have gone below the poverty line, and almost 100 million people have lost their jobs. We've seen a huge crisis of climate action and climate finance. We are seeing almost 75 countries of the world facing a global debt crisis. We are seeing many other challenges, including the present challenge of banks crisis in the United States. But the policies being pursued today actually of loose monetary policy leading to inflation, leading to tightening of interest rates, all this eventually is leading to actually a reverse flow of resources flowing from emerging markets to the developed world. Whereas most of the growth in subsequent years will come from emerging markets and not from the developed part of the world. So the challenge also is that we need to accelerate the pace of sustainable development goals because we are midway through the 2030 year, which was critical for us, but instead of progressing, the world has actually regressed. We've seen a huge crisis of development across the world. We are seeing massive crisis of climate action. Most of us in the emerging markets have not carbonized the world. We are responsible for occupying very little carbon space out of the total carbon space available at 1.5 degrees centigrade. But irrespective of the fact that the developed world has occupied most of the carbon space, we all have to work together to ensure that at 1.5 degrees centigrade we all survive, and therefore the emerging markets also have to industrialize by decarbonize in the coming years, and that will be a critical challenge. So, India's presidency actually brings together many of these challenges, but we've always felt that every challenge is an opportunity. And the Prime Minister, when we took over the presidency, said that India's presidency will be very inclusive, it'll be very decisive, and it'll be action-oriented. To my mind, a presidency is actually a function of three different features. One is, first and foremost, the political narrative, because when India takes over the presidency, the leader is the Prime Minister, actually. He's the leader of the G20 when India is hosting it. And therefore, the political narrative is important. Secondly, the content and how are we looking to shape the final leader's memorandum, and I'll come to that. And thirdly, on how we've executed the presidency so far. We are midway point of that. And I'll dwell on all three issues. First is the political narrative and the fact that in India, the leader is a democratically elected leader the second time after in the biggest democracy of the world with 1.4 billion people. We have a democratically elected leader the second time over whose credit rating still remains very, very high. The people's acceptance still remains very high. But I think more than that, it's important to look at the kind of developmental work that has been done. In the last few years, India has made over about 35 million houses, which is for the poor rural households, which is like actually making one Australia. This has all happened in the last 6 to 7 years. That's the size and scale I'm talking about. We've provided about 110 million toilets to our citizens, which is like providing a toilet to every citizen of Germany. That's the size and scale. We've provided 243 million people with piped water connection, which is like actually providing a water connection to every single citizen of Brazil. We've made about 55,000 kilometers of roads, which is like providing the entire Earth, 1.5 times its diameter, the entire Earth. That's the kind of scale of transformation that has happened. But more important than that is that we've been able to provide a digital identity to every single individual. We've been able to provide bank accounts to every single individual. During 2015 to 2017, we were actually able to provide 500 million citizens bank account. 55% of the bank accounts opened in the world during that period were opened in India. Every second bank account was opened in India. And then through a massive drive, we embedded these bank accounts with the digital identity and the mobile number. And this has enabled us to, because we embedded these bank accounts, we've enabled every individual to make his mobile the virtual bank. And each one of us in India today use our mobile as the virtual bank to do debit and credit directly. We don't do it through a wallet, but we do it directly through that. And this has led to almost India doing about 11x more digital payments than what US and Europe do together. We do 4x more digital payments than what China does. And actually during the COVID period, 800 million people of India got direct benefit transfer money straight into their bank accounts, and we were able, instead of giving large packages, we were putting money straight into the bank accounts of these beneficiaries. So in government today, through the direct benefit transfer scheme, we were able to, today we put money straight into the bank accounts of the beneficiaries in 600 different schemes of the government. So a recent study by the Bank of International Settlement has said that what India has done in the last 7 years would normally have taken India 50 years to achieve. 50 years to achieve. But because of this digital transformation and its ability to stop leakages and its ability to ensure that the benefits of the government reach the common citizens, actually has led to 50 years of work being done in 7 years. So that's the development and the political narrative of India in terms of development. The second is about the content side of it, and its content is very important because how we shape this agenda, what are our priorities, is very important. And the priorities, to my mind, at this particular point of time is really to accelerate the pace of inclusive, resilient, and sustainable growth. The world is confronted by slow growth. The post-COVID era has seen that 1/3 of the world is in recession, and every pandemic in the world historically has led to almost every, if you go back and look at the history of pandemic, it leads to 6 years of recession post the COVID. 6 years of recession. So you will face a recessionary trend unless the leaders of the world, and when leaders of the world meet in Delhi on September 9 and 10, for them the constituency is the citizens of the world. And if you want to provide a better livelihood to the citizens of the world and ensure that we are able to lift them above poverty line, if we are able to provide better education, better health, better nutrition to the citizens of the world, you need to accelerate the pace of inclusive, resilient, and sustainable growth. And to my mind, at this particular point of time, at this juncture, at this crucial moment in history, that, to my mind, is the critical challenge before the leaders of the world. And therefore, how do we bring in inclusive, resilient, and sustainable growth is the challenge for all of you leading thinkers. It's very important. The second is, as I said, that the Sustainable Development Goals are an accepted priority for everyone. It's an accepted priority for the leaders of the world, which was pushed by the United Nations, but accepted by all the leaders of the world. But what we've seen during the COVID and the present cost of living crisis that we are facing as a consequence of the financial policies pursued by the developed world, it has led to a scenario where inflation is impacting several parts of the world, and therefore it's impacting livelihoods, and the cost of living crisis, as well as the post-COVID era, has seen huge segments getting impacted on both literacy and health and education and nutrition. And therefore, how do you implement the Sustainable Development Goals? What is the new action plan for the world to lift these people who've been impacted by the COVID, and how do we keep the SDG action plan in place for the 2030 agenda? And to my mind, both SDGs and climate action are two sides of the same coin. Both two sides of the same coin. So you need resources for both the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, because countries which are facing a climate crisis are also facing a crisis of livelihood. And the countries which are facing a challenge of livelihood are also facing a challenge of being confronted by climate in a very big way. And therefore, how do you find resources for both SDGs and climate action is a major challenge. And therefore, my view is that all these institutions, multilateral institutions, which were built in the post-World War II COVID, post-World War II Bretton Woods period, are all, designed for a different era. And therefore, you need these institutions to be able to raise 10x of the resources that they are providing to the developing world by using many other institutional frameworks like blended finance, first loss guarantees, credit enhancement, using the MEGA structure much more. And that is not happening because the present institutional structure of many of these institutions is designed only to do direct lending. Now, in an economy of the size of India, for instance, I mean, I'm just giving you this example of India because we are an economy of 3 trillion plus. The World Bank lending is just about 3 billion for SDGs and climate, 3 billion in an economy of 3 trillion. So you need a much higher level of flow of resources for many of the emerging countries and the economies of the South. And it's important because when leaders meet on September 9th and 10th, they have to talk not merely the language of the developed world, they have to talk the language of the global South. Because that's where the real impact in terms of COVID or sustainable development goals have happened. And therefore, you need much more resources to flow in. And there's no shortage of resources. Let me tell you, there are $300 trillion available with the private sector. There's no shortage of money. It's our inability to use institutional finances and make them flow to different countries because the risk of Asia is very different from the risk of developed world, and the risk of Africa is very different. And therefore, the developed countries get resources at 1.5 to 2%, Asia gets it at 8%, Africa gets it at 16%, sub-Saharan countries get it at 22%. Now you need an agency, to my mind, you need an agency which is able to de-risk all these risks across the world and put it together and enable resources to flow in at much more lower rates of interest. And secondly, you need an agency which is able to do project development of a much more sophisticated level and de-risk many of these projects to enable resources to flow in. And resources will then flow in from institutional financiers, pension funds, many other resources. So you need agencies to structure projects, de-risk them in a very big way. And therefore the challenge is that these institutions, which were designed for actually driving growth and to ensure that the better financial policies, which have lost their way, actually need to focus on some of these key critical issues. And fourthly, to our mind, digital transformation is the key. And this is based on our own experience that in India we were able to build digital public infrastructure. Whether it was identity, whether it was Jam Trinity, whether it was COVID during the COVID period, these models are very different from the big tech model which has been pursued so far. So if you look at the last 2.5 decades, most innovation in the world has happened through Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon in the western part of the world, and they've happened through Tencent and Alibaba in China. And this has happened because we've provided access to all these large companies of our data, and that data has then been mined for artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think there's a huge debate on this data being so critical. I think this will be the biggest challenge in the coming years. And therefore, Europe pursued a very different policy of GDPR, and then it focused on privacy, but then it killed innovation in many ways, and we've not seen much innovation coming in from Europe. But in India, we followed a very different policy, and that is, we said there will be a digital public infrastructure layer, which is in public interest, publicly owned, but we'll allow private sector. All private sector innovates and competes. And therefore, in India, we've seen PhonePe competing with Google Pay. We've seen Paytm compete with WhatsApp. We've seen 40 different apps competing in the market space with each other. And then we've seen many unicorns emerging from payments. And then we saw a wave of completely new unicorns. Lending, Cart, Pine Labs, we've seen MobiKwik, all using that payment history then to provide credit to citizens. And this is all paperless, cashless credit from payment history. And then we saw another set of new startups and unicorns emerging, which then started using this payment history and the digital identity to provide wealth management to tier 2, tier 3 cities and rural areas. So you had startups like Zerodha and Upstock, etc. And Zerodha today occupies almost 30% of our stock market space. And we widened and provided greater depth to the stock market by tier 2, tier 3 cities coming in and using this digital identity without any paper, without cashless. On the basis of mobile, you could do transactions as a consequence of this. So a completely new set of unicorns emerging on that. And then we had another set of unicorns which further revolutionized this, which started doing end-to-end origination and certification for insurance work. And you had a new set of unicorns like Digit and Acco actually doing insurance in about 2 to 3 minutes time, providing insurance policies 24/7, 365 days a year to people in rural areas, tier 2, tier 3 cities. So it's all the use of your digital identity, banking, banks, your ability to do cashless, paperless work through digital technology. And we've seen digital transformation of a phenomenal order in India and transforming lives of citizens in India. So if you look around the world, there are close to 4 billion people, 3.8 billion people who do not have a digital identity. There are 2.5 billion people who do not even have a bank account in the world. 133 countries do not have a digital fast payment. So you need to transform the lives of these citizens. And our view is that without digital transformation, it will not be possible to transform the lives of citizens in the world. And therefore, you need to use digital technology to transform lives. And this is critical. This is really critical. And therefore, it's not just accelerated, inclusive, sustainable growth. It's not just climate action, climate finance. It's not just SDG, but digital transformation is key. And reforming multilateral institution is important. And lastly, for us, the priority is that we will see more and more women playing a key role, and therefore the Prime Minister, and in India we have more women than men today, with 1,022 women to 1,000 men. And it will not be possible to transform the world if you are not increasingly focusing on greater productivity coming in from almost half the population of the world. And therefore, how to improve learning outcomes, how to improve health outcomes. So one of the studies by a leading institution said that it will take 132 years to bring parity between men and women. We don't have 132 years. How do you do this transformation in a generation is important. And what do you need to do to bring this parity between men and women so that you can improve learning outcome, health outcomes, and how do you provide a greater transfer of assets and wealth to women so that their lives get transferred? There are a number of case studies from emerging markets on this, including our own self-help groups model of what we've done. So these are the broad priorities which we've focused on. And thirdly, on how you do the G20, and many of you have seen this. For us, engagement groups have been very important. Think 20 has done a spectacular job, and I want to really compliment Mr. Sujan Chinoy and Samir, Sachin, Rohan, all their team, which has done a spectacular job of Think 20. It's been the liveliest, the most vibrant, and the most dynamic of our engagement groups. They've done a phenomenal job. But more important is that our leader, our Prime Minister, felt that our G20 should be very different from rest. Most countries actually view G20 as something which is held in the capital, remains in the capital, one city even. But because we are doing, during G20, we do about 215 odd events it should be very different. It's not like doing a World Cup for 10 days, not like doing a World Cup football for 15 days. It's like a whole year event, and therefore we felt that this is a G20 should be taken out into different cities of India. And we're doing 215 meetings in 60 cities. We're using this opportunity to transform our cities, improve the urban process, drainage, sewage, solid waste. So we've used this to do legacy work in terms of better management of these cities. And we've used this to push the brand entity of the states in terms of their culture, in terms of their handloom, in terms of their handicraft, in terms of their, pushing their, we've asked each one of the states to create their own brand for the international market using the G20. So our G20 is a people's movement, very different from any other G20 done anywhere else in the world. We've used this opportunity to transform India in many ways, and that's been our attempt. So we are midway through this G20. Our G20 is shortened because we are doing it in September 9th and 10th because of the international calendar. We are already in the month of May. Now, all working groups have had two meetings. They've put out their drafts. The drafts are being negotiated at an advanced stage. And based on those drafts, I have drafted out the leaders' declaration now. And I broadly discussed this with Sameer, that how we are trying to make the leaders' declaration very, very action-oriented. Our leaders' declaration, our attempt, as our Prime Minister said, will be very different. It will not be very text-heavy. It will be very action-oriented. And therefore, for us, putting the preamble, making the priorities, and then putting action below them is very important. And for us, as I said, Think 20 is a very important group, engagement group. And what you feed onto us is very critical and very important. And therefore, that should form a very important input into the final leaders' memorandum, to my mind. And therefore, my request to all of you is that kindly make your recommendations. Don't make it text-heavy. Nobody has the time in the world except, great intellectuals who keep reading 100 pages. We are not interested in making 100 pages of document. We want it to be tight, crisp, and action-oriented. So please make very specific action-oriented recommendations. They should be very tight, action-oriented recommendations. All of you follow a lot of intellectual rigor. All of you are intellectuals. You've all written long, long papers. But leaders of the world do not have the time to read. They're caught up in so many complex issues of the world that they do not have time to read long essays and long papers. Let me tell you that. So, when the world is confronted with crisis, they want action. And I want T20 to make this clearly realize the complexity of the scenario, the crisis the world is confronted with. There's no point to write long essays. There's no time for it. Nobody in the world has the time to read long essays. Please put clear, precise actions. Give me 10 action points which must form a part of the leaders' memorandum. That is my request to you. Give me action 1, action 2, action 3, which will transform the world, which will shake up the leaders, which will enable them to drive changes in the world, which will enable them to drive progress and growth in the world, which will enable them to transform the lives of citizens of the world, and which will be human-centric in nature. And what I'm looking for from T20 is 10 precise action points which will enable us to give a very dynamic perspective to the leaders on the crisis that is confronting the world. And I'll be truly delighted to get this. There is no better group, there's no better set of intellectuals than all of you who assembled here today. All of you, if you provide it, it will greatly assist us, support us, and give us a lot of intellectual backing to what we are doing. And therefore, my request to all of you is that kindly make it as action-oriented as you can. And that will greatly help us and assist us and support us. I really thank you all, and I look forward to your recommendations. I can only assure you that your recommendations will find a very important place, and you are here. What you do today will enable you to really transform the world. What you do today will enable you to reach out to the leaders of the world. What you do today will enable you to give a completely new perspective, a new dynamism to the world. So I really look forward to this perspective, that there is no time for long essays, there is no time for theoretical work, there is only time for precise action. And therefore, 10 clear, precise action points which will enable the leaders to transform the world and put the citizens of the world at the center point of those recommendations. With these few words, I look forward to your recommendations. We'll be very happy to incorporate them and take this forward. But Think 20 for us is the most important group because it comprises of the best intellectuals of the world. And if the intellectuals of the world can't redefine the world, then nobody else can. And I, as the G20 Sherpa, fall back on your recommendations and your action points and how you look at the present crisis and how you would transform that crisis into a great opportunity to reshape and reconfigure the world. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.